Alright, guys, let me see if I can articulate this. So, I listened to a really cool lesson, maybe two lessons, like half of one and maybe short of 8 minutes of the end of the second one. So, part of it was John chapter 7, and then the other part of it was John chapter 6. I guess this was from Tanakh Talk. Um, they were talking about John chapter 7. That was live today, Labor Day. And then John chapter 6 was a previous day. Now I want to talk about these two parts of these two chapters from what might be considered a Jewish perspective, which was interesting to me because it was something I didn't know. And it's kind of given me a new light looking things up. And I've never really talked about this before, and I never really thought this way before today. So I'm working this idea live. Um, but these are not my opinions. These are based on this rabbi's lesson that he just gave. A couple lessons basically, and I'm gonna try my best to kind of explain this guy's take. So bear with me. I'm gonna have to get to these two chapters. I'm gonna have to get to um John chapter 7, John chapter 6. I'm organizing my phone so that I can close all these other windows that are open. I already have part of it open. Um, what's that Bible app? Bible Gateway, I guess? I don't know. Let's see. I think I took the app off my phone. So I'm going to be looking at Bible Gateway and Safaria.org. I think they still don't have the new revised standard version. They have the Catholic edition, Anglicized Catholic edition, um, updated edition, um, or I could stick at the revised standard version. But I have a new revised standard version. I just didn't bring my Bible, any of my Bibles with me. So let's see if this will do. I'm gonna just put in John 6 through 7. Let's see if it'll look it up for me. Now, this style of looking at these texts, I guess I'll try and explain, and I have never talked about this before, so just please bear with me and be kind. Um, so this rabbi started going through some of these portions of the text and explaining, I guess, the sources behind them according to Jewish uh, literature that states that at times where the people are talking or where Jesus is talking, um, people are getting things incorrect, according to this rabbi. So the example, I guess we're going to look at the example from John chapter 7, verse, um, it was near verse 22. Okay, let's look at John chapter 7, verse 19. Let's start there. So, John chapter 7, verse 19. Did not Moses give you the law? yet none of you keeps the law. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? 20. The crowd answered, You have a demon. Who is trying to kill you? 21. Jesus answered them, I performed one work, and all of you are astonished. 22. Because of this, Moses gave you circumcision. It is, of course, not from Moses, but from the patriarchs. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. 23. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? 24. Do not judge by appearance, but judge with right judgment. Now, this rabbi, when I was reading this, I was like, okay, this isn't an uncommon passage. Now, this isn't really a passage that a lot of Christians focus on, and when people do read it, they're usually going to say something along the lines of what Jesus is saying is right. What Jesus is saying about the people trying to kill him, he was right that they were trying to kill him. And what Jesus says about um, what Jesus says about circumcision, or I guess what he says in the next part, where he says, um, uh, in 22, I guess he says, um, he's kind of making the assumption that circumcising a man on the Sabbath is an issue. And in 23, he says, if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Now, I can't tell if this rabbi was looking at it wrong, because he was basically saying that Jesus was saying that people were trying to kill him, and he was stating Jesus is wrong because the people mentioned in verse 20, you have a demon who's trying to kill you. So they're kind of like, who's trying to kill you? We're not trying to kill you. That was a crowd who responded to that. But then before that, he says, did not Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. And the rabbi mentions that Jesus is teaching this at the festival of Sukkot in the temple. He's teaching that. He's teaching this. So after he's teaching, he starts telling everybody that they don't keep the law. And the rabbi mentions, well, they're at temple. They're keeping the festival of Sukkot. They're there worshiping at that time. Uh, and he says, uh, that Moses gave you circumcision. There's a clarification there that it's from the patriarchs, not from Moses. Um, and the part where it says, and you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. And 23, if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, right? So I guess that's the part that this rabbi was trying to get at. He was saying that Jesus is wrong in stating that breaking that performing circumcision on the Sabbath is considered breaking the law. But I think what he's saying is you keep the Sabbath. You are supposed to keep the Sabbath, but in order to not break the law of circumcision, on the eighth day you perform the circumcision. Um, but I could be reading that wrong. Because is he saying that that they are being hypocritical by performing circumcision on the Sabbath? And as a Christian background, that isn't even like an argument. Like nobody's even like arguing about it. Nobody Christians overall, they're not usually focused on, you know, on the eighth day of a male child being in the world, um, he needs to get circumcised. I don't think there's a lot of people in Christianity who really seem to care about that. I know a lot of people in Western society get circumcised. A lot of guys do. I don't really know anything about it. Like I don't have kids. I don't have a son. I've never been involved in that process or in that decision making or anything. Um, it's only come up when I've heard guys who say that they're not circumcised or they are or whatever. Like I don't know. Like it doesn't really come up in my life that much that it really matters. About what's happening on the eighth day with a boy child. Um, but I guess it kind of depends on how you look at the wording of this. Um, he's basically saying if a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Now, this rabbi explains that healing isn't always considered work, and there are certain laws and there are certain laws that would make something considered work on the Sabbath or not. And there are certain laws that would make it so that a circumcision on the Sabbath could be right or it could be wrong. Now, he did mention some nuanced information that people from a Christian background would not have reading this. We would just say, oh, Jesus is right, and he's calling these people out by saying that they are being hypocritical between the Sabbath and the circumcision situation, and he's calling them out because they were wrong and being hypocritical. And then we move on and we just start reading the next part. Usually that's how Christians will read this. But I guess the new method that I'm thinking after hearing these lessons today, I was like, I think a lot of these times where Jesus is talking about the law and talking about the prophets, and or even in the New Testament, where even like if John is mentioning it or Matthew is mentioning it or someone in the crowd is mentioning it or like they're quoting like a Pharisee or a scribe or something like that. I think what I'm going to need to do is look it all up, because I all this time whenever I read the Bible, the most I'll usually do is look for a footnote that has a a um, a reference to where in the Old Testament these people are quoting. For example, I don't know where the verse even is, so I'm not gonna really say, but there's a part like somewhere in chapter 6 or 7 of John where they talk about the prophet, where people are starting to say Jesus is a prophet because of the miracles, and then there's a reference of, you know, how would you determine someone's a prophet? You could look that up in Malachi. You could look that up in Deuteronomy. think it was Deuteronomy 18:15. And now always check me on these verses. I am bad with numbers. I am bad with numbers, especially I haven't committed a lot of this stuff to memory. Sometimes I'm just listening to something earlier in the day and then I try to remember it and I get the answer. I get the details wrong. So look it up. You know, it might not be Deuteronomy 18:15, but in my head that's what it is, but I could be wrong. But basically it's somewhere in Deuteronomy and then the very last like sentence or so of the book of Malachi, right before you go into Matthew, it talks about a prophet being sent, Elijah. Um, but then this rabbi also says that there wouldn't be any prophets during that time. There wouldn't have been any prophets. I think he said either for 1,200 years or 2,400 years or some amount of really lengthy amount of time of years, there wouldn't have been any prophets. And he mentioned that. And I'm like, I don't know where he got that from. I don't know if that can be cited from somewhere. But basically, I was while the guy was talking, he mentioned that the Talmud and the Mishnah talk more about this circumcision and Sabbath issue. And this rabbi mentions that in cases of circumcision where the child is ill, if he's ill on the eighth day when he's supposed to get circumcised, they'll have to postpone the circumcision until another day. So any day after the eighth day, if it gets postponed, you are no longer allowed to have the circumcision on the Sabbath. Say if the ninth day ends up being the Sabbath or the 20th day ends up being the Sabbath, you would have to postpone it a day later. If the child happens to no longer be sick, the first day that they're not sick after the eighth day is the ninth day, and if it falls on the Sabbath, you're not allowed to circumcise. You'd have to wait till the 10th day. Now, is this passage of Jesus saying that? Is it saying that they're breaking that law? Because as someone raised in Christianity, I would not have even known that that nuanced situation even existed. I would not have even known that. I would not have ever even thought. I would have thought that there's some kind of conflict between the circumcision and the Sabbath. Assumed that Jesus was quoting something in the Bible, never really known where to find it, and then been like, okay, I'll just take it at face value, move on to the next sentence. You know, that's how I would read it. That's how I've always read it. But knowing this new information, and it's up to people if they really want to be looking at the Talmud or the Mishnah or whatever, but I'm like, well, this information, there's not a lot of notes in the Bible itself that explain this circumcision stuff. It talks about circumcising your son on the eighth day, but it doesn't talk about all this other nuanced stuff. That's found elsewhere. But it seems like Jesus has knowledge of these types of teachings, but the common Christian does not have knowledge of these types of teachings. So this morning when I was listening to this guy talk, I'm like, well, how many other passages in the Bible are like this where someone who's from a Christian background just reads it and then we're just like, okay, this is what Jesus said, it must be right, and then we just like move on and never check it and never look it up. So I was like, so when I say okay, I try not to use AI too much, but I used it to kind of search, and I searched Google. I used Google's AI, and I was like, I don't know the words I picked exactly, but I said something along the lines of, where in Jewish writings does it talk about circumcision and the Sabbath? And it's cited some spot in the Talmud, and then it said in the Talmud tractate Shabbat 131b, and then in it said also in oral tradition and in the Mishnah, and then I asked it where in the Mishnah does it say that? And then it said in Shabbat chapter 19. Now, I'm going to look at those on Sefaria.org because I looked at them earlier. So I'm going to start with looking at Shabbat 131b. I'm going to read 131b. I guess 1 and then 2. I think, let me see. Maybe it's 3. I don't know. Now I'm confused about what I was even reading. Let me see. This is talking about a lulav. I don't know where it is. I thought that's what it was. Okay, I'm gonna read it anyways because that's what I think it was. 131b. It says, starting at verse 1, I guess. It can be said that each and every moment is its proper time. The obligation to fulfill the mitzvah is perpetual, and one may not neglect it. Why should it be prohibited for him to perform actions that facilitate the performance of the mitzvah on Shabbat? Skipping some of this other stuff. It says the actions that facilitate the performance of these mitzvot do not override Shabbat, since one can render the relevant objects ownerless. One is only required to perform these mitzvot if the objects, i.e., the garment and the house, belong to him. If he renders them ownerless, he is no longer obligated to perform these mitzvot. Okay. Sorry, my mic cut off. Okay. I hope I'm still recording. So let's see. So looking at the Mishnah, so if you go to Sefaria.org and look at Mishnah Shabbat 19. Sorry, I cut off while I was reading that. It says, as a continuation to the discussion at the end of the previous chapter, which mentioned circumcision in the context of a discussion of halachot of childbirth on Shabbat, the Mishnah continues to address the halachot of circumcision. Rabbi Eliezer says, if he did not bring an implement for circumcising the child on Shabbat Eve, he brings it on Shabbat itself, uncovered, so that it will be clear to all that he is bringing a circumcision scalpel. And in times of danger, when decrees of persecution prohibit Jews from circumcising their children, one covers it in the presence of witnesses who can testify that he transported the scalpel to perform a mitzvah. And furthermore, Rabbi Eliezer said, with regard to this issue, one may even cut down trees to prepare charcoal in order to fashion tools for the purpose of circumcision. Rabbi Eliezer's approach was not universally accepted, and a principle was stated by Rabbi Akiva. Any prohibited labor that can be performed on Shabbat Eve does not override Shabbat, including transporting the scalpel, the circumcision scalpel. However, any prohibited labor involved in the mitzvah of circumcision itself that cannot be performed on Shabbat Eve overrides Shabbat. And then this is verse 2. When the 8th day of the baby's life occurs on Shabbat, he must be circumcised on that day. This is coming from the Mishnah. Therefore, one performs all the necessities of the circumcision, even on Shabbat. One circumcises the foreskin and uncovers the skin by removing the thin membrane beneath the foreskin, and sucks the blood from the wound and places on it both a bandage. I don't know what that word is. It's pelanit, and cumin as a salve. Um, if one did not grind the cumin from Shabbat Eve, he chews it with his teeth and places it on the place of circumcision as a salve. If he did not mix wine and oil on Shabbat Eve, a mixture designed to heal and strengthen the child, the wine, is placed on the wound by itself, and that the oil is placed by itself. And on Shabbat, one may not make a pouch to place over the circumcision as a bandage. And the word, I guess, abinitio. Oh, there's people over here. Abinitio. Uh, Sorry, there's some people. All right, but he may wrap a rag over it as a dressing. If he did not prepare the bandage on Shabbat Eve by bringing it to the place where the circumcision was performed, he wraps the bandage on his finger and brings it on Shabbat, even from a different courtyard. So there's probably some kind of law about taking something from one courtyard to another. That's considered work. And then it says, while the sages permitted it to be brought, they required that it be performed in an unusual fashion by wearing it in a manner of a garment. So basically, if you're wrapping this thing around your finger with the salve on it that you're going to later use as a bandage, and you wrap it, it's considered a garment versus creating a pouch, which is considered work. So it goes on. It goes on, but I mean, and then let me look at so what I had searched to find this. I searched in Google, where in Jewish law does it explain that a boy cannot be circumcised on the Sabbath? And then that's kind of how I got to that explanation. AI overview says, and it's pulling from sources. Okay, it tells you the sources. So the sources it's used, I can't really see. Goodness. It looks like one of them's Wikipedia. One of them has a blue icon with I don't know if it's Wikipedia. It's a white circle with a black W. The other icon is a blue circle with a, it looks like an open, like a little logo of a book that's open with like a page, like you're looking at it from a horizontal view. And then there's another white circle with like a dark orange flame in it. So I don't know what those sources are. It says in AI overview on Google on my phone, it says Jewish law explains that a boy must be circumcised on the eighth day, even if it falls on the Sabbath, as it is a commandment that overrides the Sabbath prohibition against performing work. This principle is based on the Talmudic discussion in Shabbat 131b and the oral tradition. While preparations must be made before Shabbat, the act of circumcision itself is an exception to the Sabbath restrictions, and a Brit Milah can be conducted on the Sabbath unless there are specific health to concerns or other exceptions apply. Now I went and looked up, is the Mishnah an oral uh, the oral Torah? It says the oral Torah consists of multiple texts that are partially explaining the oral tradition. And the part that when I looked up the oral tradition, I don't have that exactly saved. But when I looked that up, it led me to the Mishnah, to Shabbat chapter 19. Um, Now, going back to BibleGateway.com and looking at this again, we're going to pass the part, we'll just read it all again from John chapter 7, verses 19 through 24. 19. Did Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keeps the law. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? 20. The crowd answered, you have a demon. Who is trying to kill you? 21. Jesus answered them, I performed one work, and all of you are astonished. 22. Because of this, Moses gave you circumcision. And then in parentheses it says, it is, of course, not from Moses, but from the patriarchs, close parentheses. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. 23. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? 24. Do not judge by appearances, judge with right judgment. So this, I guess that verse 24 can make it be taken in different ways. Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. That almost reminds me of when my mom, a long time ago, she got pneumonia. Um, it was a really cold year, and she caught a cold, and she was working as a after school daycare worker, and she uh while working she kind of uh while working she kind of um sorry, what am I trying to say? Yeah, she kept working while she was sick, while she had a cold, and then she was working outside a whole lot and ended up getting pneumonia. This was at an Adventist school where she would work. She decided, after getting that diagnosis, I definitely need to stay home and rest and not be working on that field like that. And so she called out sick. And at that time, she didn't go to work at the school, and she also did not work. She did not go to church. She didn't go anywhere public for a while. And she wasn't going to church because she was sick. Someone that I have known since I was 5 years old, a family friend. Um, I guess once my mom had gone back to church, when she was well again, somebody had commented, this lady had commented to her, "Oh, it's good to see you back at church. Um, where have you been?" kind of thing. And then my mom was like, "I had pneumonia. I was sick. I was kind of like in bed and not really well at all. Um, and couldn't really go anywhere for a while. And the lady was like, "Oh, good. I thought you were backsliding," meaning like you're always at church. Like I thought you were backsliding. And I'm not. This isn't like a brag, but I'm just saying like I was raised going to church. That's what we did. It's not. I'm not bragging about that we went to church a lot. We just did. That's just the reality of it. We went to church. I mean, I one of my friends. I remember a close friend of mine at a beach vespers being like, he was not from the Adventist world, but I had invited him. We showed up on time, which was early. It was me, him, the pastor, and we were like helping the pastor set up because we were there early, which was on time, and we're setting up the table for like food and like clearing out the pit so they could put the wood and like start a bonfire. And while we're doing all that work, he's like, because he had already brought all the stuff from his van by himself, taking multiple trips to do that. So me and my friend are setting up everything, and then the pastor wants to go boogie boarding while there's time before people get there. And so we are just like, okay, like we're gonna set up. We'll help you set up. And my friend tells me, I don't know how you go to church so much. Like I find it hard to do. And I had never thought about it at that point. I never thought about that I go to church. I was just kind of like, it's just what I do. Like I guess the way I explained it to him, I was like, how do like it's just like people have coffee in the morning for breakfast, or some people eat breakfast every single morning. Like you don't skip it. It's just part of your routine. Like it wasn't something I really thought about. I just did it because I did it, and I had a social circle there, a social life there, and I wasn't really thinking of it as a burden. I was like, well, I'm going to socialize and I'm going to like learn and like hang out and do the routine. I liked it. I liked Sabbath school because there was a lot of learning. I liked the Vespers the night before because usually there was a lot of learning involved and like discussions and stuff. I wasn't the biggest fan of like church, but I was involved in like praise teams, so we'd have to do the music some Saturday mornings, and then it's like if you're already there in the morning and you have to do the closing song too, like you're gonna stay the whole service. So I didn't really have a lot of reasons to not go. And it was nearby, it was local, it was always like within like a 10-15 minute drive for the most part. It wasn't a burden to get to and from it. And everyone I wanted to see was there, and my parents were going, and we just went as a family. That's what we did. And it's not even like I'm not even saying it like in a braggy way, but that's just what we did. It's just like a lot of people, you could probably count on one hand if you eat breakfast every morning. You could probably count on one hand the amount of times you skip breakfast in a year. Is just that's kind of how I felt about church. I was like, well, we just do this. Like sometimes, of course, I didn't want to do it, and I wanted to sleep in, or I may not have wanted to go. But usually, I was cool doing it. Like it usually wasn't like it was so much of a routine. I had never even thought about it until that guy had asked me. But I guess the example I was giving was more so with my mom, who was kind of mentioning, how that lady was saying about thinking that she had been backsliding. That's kind of what that verse reminds me of, where it says, "Do not judge by appearance, but judge with right judgment." Like people always want to look at you and see what you're doing and start saying that you're doing this or that. So I guess my questions with reading these verses would be, a, I mean, I don't know, there might be more than what I'm even going to mention here, more options, but a, is Jesus experiencing a situation where people are kind of like trying to wrongfully call him out? Are they trying to wrongfully call him out and be like, you're doing something wrong, even though even though I guess technically, according to these Jewish passages in the Talmud and the Mishnah, there are kind of loopholes with it, right? It's like you can't do you can do the circumcision on the Sabbath. That is appropriate to do. But there is maybe a loophole with it where if a child is ill, you're not supposed to perform the circumcision while the child is ill. If the circumcision falls, if it can't fall on the eighth day, and say the ninth day is the first day of the child being having been born, it's the ninth day now, and the ninth day happens to be the Sabbath. Is he saying that people are performing the circumcision on the Sabbath uh, so that the law won't be broken that way? Like, because that would be breaking the law technically. Is if you perform it on the Sabbath when it's not the eighth day. So performing it any day, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, or eighth day. So, sorry, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh day, or ninth day, or past the ninth day. If any of those days are the Sabbath, you can't do it on the Sabbath. You'd have to either do it if the ninth day was before the Sabbath, or if the ninth day was after the Sabbath, you'd have to do it not on the Sabbath. So if a child is finally well, and the reason why they couldn't perform the circumcision on the eighth day which was the Sabbath, if it was an eighth day of the child having already been born and it was the Sabbath, they can't. If it's the eighth day and it is the Sabbath, they can perform the circumcision. If it's not the eighth day and it's the Sabbath, they can't perform the circumcision. But and you're also not supposed to perform the circumcision when it's not the eighth day of the child having been born. But if the reason why is because the child is sick, and I don't know if there are other reasons why, but say that's the main reason why people wouldn't do it, um, you could perform the circumcision on any of the ninth day or after. But if that ninth day or after happens to fall on the Sabbath, that would not be okay. Are these people actually performing circumcisions on the Sabbath day when they shouldn't perform it? Is that what he's saying? Or is he saying that they are doing it? Um or is he basically saying that they're judging him, saying that he healed the man's body on the Sabbath? I think there's a passage, I don't know where, I haven't looked it up. You can look it up yourselves, just the method that I was saying, how I looked up on Google and I asked Google, where in Jewish literature does it state this or that? You could probably ask Google about a passage where you can find that information. And if you didn't already know, I think now I've explained how you can find the information. As someone who is raised in a Christian tradition, if you're interested in trying to find this stuff, that's how I go about finding it. Now, I don't rely on AI. I usually use AI to find the the passages, and then I read the passages, and then I see what the AI says after. I try not to read the whole AI information first. I try to read the passages first. I just use AI to get the reference point, and then I go on Safaria.org and you pick which book you want on Safaria.org. If you want the Mishnah, if you want the Talmud, if you want whatever book it is where it says that you can find the passages, and then you look them up yourself and you can read them in English, read it for yourself, and see what these passages are actually referencing when Jesus is saying these things. Because if you're just going by the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures, you're not going to find this argument in there. And it doesn't make any sense. When you're reading it, you're just kind of like, why would this even be like an argument? Why are there people even arguing about this? Why are there people? It seems like at least the crowd he was talking to were very confused as to why he was stating that they're trying to kill him. But then in verse 19, he also says, "None of you keep the law," and somebody must have threatened to kill him. Um, But he's basically saying that people are judging by appearances and not with right judgment. And I guess his method of right judgment is judging by what the law says. And the law of Moses is basically stating the law of Moses shouldn't be broken. Uh, Now, there's another passage somewhere else that you can look up yourself that talks about healing on the Sabbath. Now, the rabbi who was talking about these lessons online, he was not talking about someone healing on the Sabbath, at least the part that I listened to. Um, he talked a little bit about it. Now, he mentioned part of his statement, and part of his statement, something that I found interesting that I haven't looked up yet. You can look this part up. It can be your homework to look it up. See if you can find it yourself. Um, there's some kind of law, I think, that has to do with what is considered work on the Sabbath. Now, if you are performing a type of cut, like making an incision with a scalpel, like somebody does when they're performing a circumcision, if you're performing a healing on the Sabbath that involves using a scalpel, is that considered work? You'd want to find that out. Is that considered work? And then this rabbi makes a point that nobody really considers circumcision as healing, right? But is there a law against using a scalpel for healing? And then he states, the rabbi in this lesson states that what Jesus actually did was not breaking the law. And so who is it that's trying to kill him for breaking the law for healing on the Sabbath when he wasn't breaking the law? Because what he did, he wasn't even using any kind of like tools or anything. He wasn't creating an incision of any kind, cutting skin of any kind, carrying any kind of a tool from one courtyard to another that would be considered work. I mean, you see how these laws are determined. There's more to it when Jesus is quoting things. There's more to it than what the average Christian is ever taught. Like, average Christians are never taught this kind of stuff. And so when you read it, it almost reads as if Jesus is just saying something super strange that doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's like, so basically, um, yeah, him speaking and using words to heal somebody is not considered work on the Sabbath. So if people were judging him based on that, but it's not against the law, like there are methods of healing that are probably against the law. I don't know them off the top of my head, but let's say that there are some methods when you go and you look it up yourself and you find, hey, there are some healing methods that would be considered breaking the Sabbath. Um, his method, according to this rabbi, of speaking this guy well as a form of healing, using your voice to speak to heal is not considered work on the Sabbath. Now, I don't know that 100% sure because, again, I have not looked that part up. But if you look it up, you'll be able to determine for yourself and see if Jesus did, um, if Jesus did break the Sabbath or not, according to what's actually written in Jewish texts. Because a lot of that is what he's quoting from. And a lot of times in Christianity, people read this stuff and none of us are ever told what it means. We're just like, the only thing that we usually would have access to would be the parts of the Torah that talk about the Sabbath and the parts that talk about circumcision. And none of that sounds controversial in any way, shape, or form because it sounds pretty straightforward here. I mean, I don't even think I knew anything about this about um, being able to um, being able to perform a circumcision if if the eighth day of the child being born it happens to fall on the Sabbath. I don't think I even knew that was like an argument of any kind. Even though I've read this before, I never even put two and two together and thought that that would even be a debate. So I guess my new method really is going to have to be going in and looking at these sentences where Jesus is saying, you say this, or the law says this, or the law says that. It's like usually I was just taking it at face value and reading it and being like, yeah, the law does talk about Sabbath. It talks about circumcision. Okay, we just move on. Like I was like, why are they even arguing? Why is this even an argument? Like, why is there like a whole? This is a whole discussion happening in temple on a holiday. It's almost like if you could imagine. I don't know what a Christian holiday is that wouldn't be like. Because I don't think Christianity has like holidays that are that long. But isn't Sukkot 8 days? I don't know. I'm wondering if there's any significance with the with that too, because Sukkot is 8 days, right? Is it? Now I'm like second guessing myself. How many days is Sukkot? 7 days. Sukkot is 7 days. Um, and it says making a total observance for those outside of Israel, effectively an 8 day event to ensure the festival is observed on the correct day. Um, it says Sukkot, also known as the Festival of Booths, lasts for 7 days within Israel. However, it is followed by Shemini Atzeret or Simchat Torah, an additional festival day, making the total observance for those outside of Israel effectively an 8 day event to ensure the festival is observed on the correct day. So I guess they kind of made an extra, I don't know if they made it, but there's an extra day in case you're not in Israel. It's a 7 day event, but it's technically celebrated for 8 days, I guess, technically. So, yeah. So that's basically okay. So it's 7 days or 8 days. So I don't even know if there's any significance with that whatsoever. Maybe there is, maybe there's not. I mean, I don't want to like read into something because that is kind of interesting. If you kind of have this 7 day, 8 day thing, Sabbath is the seventh day. The baby being, I mean, it doesn't matter if what day the baby is really born. Like basically the eighth day of them being born. Um, their eighth day that they've been born. Uh, since somebody gives birth, the eighth day after that, basically. Um, and so, if that's what we're considering 8 days, the eighth day after that birth, and then there's the 7 day Sabbath and the 8 day circumcision. There's a 7 day and the 8 day with Sukkot. So I don't know if there's a significance there, but if there is, that's pretty interesting. Um, and I don't even know how you'd find out. Um, there might just be certain parallels on it. Um, and, and I guess before that, so before chapter 17:14 and before 17:10, when they start talking about when he starts teaching in the temple, and when they start talking about uh, whether or not he's a good man or whether or not he's deceiving the crowd. I'm kind of going backwards, looking backwards here. I'm trying to find the part that says that he healed. I don't know. Because it seems like it would have happened way back. Um, because before that, he's talking about whoever eats his eats his flesh and drinks his blood. So I don't know exactly where it talks about the healing part, what he actually said. Um, Talks about the Jesus walking on water. Um, he basically fed the people, feeding the 5,000. So I don't know exactly where the part is though that he would have been, um, that he had healed. And looks like people have been following him though, but yeah, I don't really know. Like, it's interesting. It's definitely an interesting way to read a passage. I'm not saying I've never looked anything up, but I've never really read it and questioned what what the things were that Jesus was saying and are they right or not, or what the things were that the crowd was saying, or what the things were that the religious leaders were saying and are they right or not. But he is talking about judgment overall. He sounds to be talking about judgment of judging whether or not somebody's keeping the commandments or not, and placing judgment on them. And he's saying that he's in the right. And then the rabbi who was talking about this lesson, with that specific issue, was also saying, overall, Jesus was in the right. Like, he wasn't breaking the Sabbath. I don't know if these other people were breaking the Sabbath, and I don't know what the law was that they weren't keeping, unless it was something about judgment, which I don't really know what what is talked about when it comes to judgment. Um, and yeah, so I don't know if I have much more to say about that, but I think when it comes to these types of topics, I'm probably gonna have to look them up because I don't really know where all these laws are coming from. Where he's kind of like, there's always this debate going on and on and on. Um, and it's kind of confusing to try and tell like where is this debate coming from? Why are these people always debating? Which is kind of like a cultural thing too. Like, it's not completely inappropriate for people to be debating Jewish law. Like, it's not, it's a common thing. Um, there's like a method of study that is common that people study that way. Um, yeah, it's a really confusing passage. It's really kind of weird. I thought it was really interesting to learn what those um, texts say about what those texts were saying about um, keeping the commandments, um, and about circumcision and all the little specific details about carrying a bandage or how to make the salve for the wound or how to you know get the blood out, or how to, I don't know, like all that kind of stuff. Um, and if it's written as part of a um I guess as part of a as part of these other commandments that aren't in the Bible, but Jesus is kind of possibly referring to people who are making comments or who are performing actions, behaviors based on those. Um, yeah, I just wonder. Like, I wonder what is really up with that. Um, and yeah, I don't know if I have too much more to really say on it, but I think there are gonna come a lot more times in the future when I'm studying things where I'm gonna have to look it up more. I mean, I do look stuff up a little bit, but this kind of stuff usually I haven't really been looking it up like that. So, all right, this is lengthy. I tried to hit about an hour. All right, that's it for now though. Thanks for listening.